all the prophets in Jerusalem who said, you know, Nebuchadnezzar will not come, so that were the bad ones. The optimists were the false prophets, the pessimists were the good prophets. So I said to the rabbi, you know, how do you differentiate today about true and false prophets, not to speak of true and false rabbis? He said, well, he said, we forgot the prophets, and we have settled that all already a long time ago. So he had settled some questions a long time ago, and the other questions he wanted to settle in the future. I mean, I said, you are a hopeless case, you know. He sits in the middle between the past and the future and doesn't know where he is. So this, but it's not only the rabbi, you know, it's the priests too and the ministers as well. So it's a strange club. So nevertheless, this is the about the money thing there. And so the reason why, I think Mohammed was a businessman, right? Buddha was a nobleman. Jesus belonged to the poorest of the poor. He belonged to a class of people who repaired the agricultural instruments. He had no land, nothing, and but they went from one farm to the other and repaired things. And so from this perspective, the prophets were middle-class people, and the whole Torah is written on a middle-class basis. The New Testament is the outcry of the lowest and the oppressed, almost slave people. So, and that explains that for them the whole thing looks a little bit more different, and so the New Testament is much more radical than any of the prophet was. John the Baptist was even more radical maybe than Jesus, and Paul was less radical than Jesus was. You can see how fast they die, because these are the people who die. Jesus says, you know, have you ever heard of a prophet who has not been slaughtered in Jerusalem? That is a most ironical statement. But he had people who didn't understand irony because they were not educated and they were not differentiated, except Judas, maybe. Ishkariot, the man from the suburb of Jerusalem who had the cash there for him. So from this perspective, then it could maybe be explained why money then there was a usury law, so a Jew could not even cheat another Jew. He could cheat a non-Jew, a Roman or a Greek, but not a Jew. So it would be an interesting thing where this negative attitude of, I mean, Jesus knew that you needed money now and you had to use it, so make friends with the evil money, he would say. So make something good of it. That was, you know, was his statement there. By the way, this thing which the rabbi brought up, you know, you will have the poor always with you. That is used by the right all the time here. There's another thing which they use, and that is, who does not work should not eat. And there you have one of these many contradictions. Jesus says, look at the birds, and I look at them all day long. Look at the birds, they do not work and they eat because the Heavenly Father feeds them. But then Paul does not agree with that, and he says, you know, who does not work should not eat. And so enlighteners, of course, see those contradictions and say, what the hell are we supposed to believe now, the one or the other? It has something to do with that Christianity, you know, became less and less radical as time goes on, and adjusted itself more and more to the imperial power until they finally made peace with the same state which had executed the poor man, Jesus. The rich and the powerful, you know, because he provoked them all the time, to the point when he threw them out of the temple, then took revenge and killed him, so, and murdered him. So, like you can see when you in our country, when you see all those people who have been McKinley and so on, who have been assassinated, and those who have been threatened by assassination, you know, like Roosevelt and Truman and so on, you see it's usually people who want to do something good who have to die first, and the others are quite safe. Stalin was quite safe. Hitler had 42 assassination attempts and nothing worked, and so on. So it's a certain group of people who are particularly endangered species. Okay, so idolatry, money, that is one point we want to make, and then let me see where we are. We want to have a little movie there. Then there is this liberalism. It's another thing. Is he a liberal or whatever? We don't want to decide that today. We just want to make clear what that means. Liberalism comes from Protestantism. It's a secularized philosophy growing out of Calvinism. So that does not mean that Calvinism or Lutheranism, that they were an ideology of the middle classes. First of all, they became that later on in here, but it wasn't that way. So when Luther said, you know, that you can have a vocation by God, not only priests have a vocation, but social workers have a vocation, businessmen have a vocation, and so on. That was meant in a very religious sense. Luther was an extremely religious person, and if he had not get in trouble with Rome, he was sainthood material. Calvin was a lawyer. That was a little bit different. So, but Calvin came up with this idea of predestination, which is biblical to some extent, but it was not meant ideologically in the sense that that you are rich, that is a sign that you are chosen or whatever, which became later on an ideology here. So I drove with a very rich guy in the 50s to New York, and the two beggars were fighting for a bench, and they on top of it or below it, it rained and so on. He said, who can help them? Even God does not help them. So then it has become an ideology. In the meantime, the system doesn't need any religious or secular ideology anymore. My students know if they don't function, they go on the other side of the railroad station, and that is motivation enough. So that is liberalism, so it comes from there, and in the meantime it still has some religious traits sometimes, but it has otherwise become secular. But the most important thing is that liberalism is atomistic. That means individual, it's individualistic. So you have to pull yourself, you know, out of a mess, out by your own hair and so on. The best what we give to you is freedom of opportunity. So you have the opportunity. If you don't use the opportunity, then you are damn lazy, and then you deserve what you get, and you sit on the north side there, and that's what we belong to. It's your own fault. It's not the system's fault, and so on. So liberalism is the philosophy of the third estate. This is a third estate country. We never had noblemen here. Lord Baltimore came and he left after 3 years and never came back again. So it's almost a pure third estate country. The Constitution was made for the third estate, and they forgot the slaves. Not only the slaves, they forgot the whole fourth estate. So therefore we have today 250 million workers who don't even have a party. We are the only country which doesn't have a Labour Party, no such democratic party, like Denmark, Norway, Germany, everybody and so on. That means our 250 million workers are represented by low bourgeois characters in Congress who are billionaires and millionaires and so on, and who have to make an extra exercise, namely to live on food stamps for a week in order to know what it feels. So strange it is for them what they represent. So, or that they have to be on workers' compensation or whatever for a month or so, what that feels like and so on. So that means the 250 million are represented by people who do not belong to their class, and therefore they do not share their life and their hardships and their suffering and so on. That's why things don't move. If you had a Labour Party, it would move. Now the Democratic Party has a left wing which sometimes is close to the social democracies. Then they shout, this is class warfare, or that looks European, or whatever. So, and then they are hammered down. So that is our dilemma. The system is frozen, and we cannot get a third party in. And the Democratic Party could change into a Labour Party, but it is too much on the bourgeois side. The ruling class, the corporate ruling class, pays both parties equally. Where they put most money, that they will win. I was McGovern's campaign manager, and the money thing was just outrageous. We had money, suddenly in summer, you know, the capitalists who wanted to pay didn't pay anymore. That means I couldn't get him on television anymore. Wallace was on television all the time, and everybody knew who Wallace was, but nobody knew at the end who McGovern was. Who's McGovern? Because he was only there on Friday, when I had the $5 from students or faculty to put him on there. So that is, you know, to pay, how to pay the debts and whatever. So this all, plutocracy cannot be a democracy. So we have to think those things through. But okay, so that is now liberalism, but there's a good side to liberalism. It is a true thing that the individual is of infinite value, That's a Christian heritage, and that we liberal means libertas, freedom. So the idea of freedom is very strong. If they know all the time what it means, freedom, Christianity does not mean the same thing what they mean when they say freedom, to be a liberal and freedom and so on. Freedom means freedom of choice. You can get lila and blue toilet paper and so on and so. But that is not what was meant with freedom. Freedom means not to be alienated. A country is the freer, the less it is alienated. The more alienation you have between the genders, between the classes, between the races, the less free it is. So positively, freedom means to go out of oneself to the other, and in the other come back to oneself. That means you can really be autonomous only when you're also solidary. Now, when you deny food stamps, that means there is no solidarity. When the youngsters say, why should I pay for health insurance? You know, I'm not getting sick, the others get sick, why should I pay for the others? Well, if he would say, you know, now I'm healthy, now I'm paying for those who are sick, and then when I get sick, the others will pay for me, that's solidarity. That's completely missing. So that means we are like an ocean liner which is listing to one side, to the individual side, and have these unbelievable difficulties to get through whatever may have to do with solidarity. So the Germans have the health insurance since 1870, the British since 1949, and so the Canadians. You can just go over to Windsor and they have it. Why in God's name don't they just call Denmark, Sweden, Norway or whatever and say, how did you do it? Can you send somebody and show us how we do it? No. Then they babble and babble around day and night and day and night. It's just awful. Then the president promised doing it. Then they canceled all the stuff which was insufficient. They had insurance without hospital care and so on and so on. You know, because they want to make money, the corporation, and not fulfill the needs like usually. That needs are the basis of an economic system, and that is how it is measured. It's not measured how many billionaires you have. But if people have housing and have eating and drinking and clothing and education and health care, that is a good country. And if that is not the case, then it's lopsided, it's distorted, and it has to be straightened out. Even the people, very conservative people, know that if we cannot get the incomes dichotomy together, these extremes there, this madman here there with his Wall Street thing, and those people who will get, if they are happy, they will get $10.50, whatever, as a minimum wage and so on. That's not a living wage, that's not a family wage, and so on. So even when they improve it, it has already been eaten up by the inflation rate. So this does not go on anymore. And the reason for that is not that we don't have anything, the reason is in the head. There, liberalism is in the head. And liberalism has this truth, the individual is important, but there are some liberals who have modified it socially. That's the Roosevelt liberalism. Obama is a Roosevelt liberalism, the others are neoliberalism. Liberals. The neoliberals are going back to the 19th century. That means before the first Roosevelt. Because the first Roosevelt were vice mayor in New York and Manhattan. And there was a rebellion. The people in the tenement houses, hells on earth there, marched all up to Upper Manhattan and burned down all the houses of the landlords and killed the landlords. And the vice president then vice mayor had to straighten it out. But he did not only straighten it out by force, but he also knew we need health care and we need government control, federal control of civil society. That means in 1906, Roosevelt knew that we need health care. And now it is 2015 and people 14 and think it is too soon. And we need a little bit more time, and we have to abolish it again, Obamacare, and start a new and whatever, probably between 2015 or whatever. Okay, so that is the stuff in which we are now. It's a hope coming suddenly who, you know, is for solidarity suddenly. That is a new picture, but we have to see, and that's what we want to discuss, you know, where he stands, what he really wants, where he comes from, and so on. And what we can expect, and not dreaming up, fantasying, something like that. This is serious stuff of thinking. Believing people are not dispensed from thinking. Believing and thinking belong together. Dogs cannot think and they have no religion. No matter how much you love them, they have self-feeling, they're getting sad, but they have no thought in their little brain. So, but we can think, and that's why we have religion. So religion has something to do with reason, and without reason you cannot have it. Okay, so that as far as liberalism is concerned, and so we have now a very, very narrow thing at this moment with the next election again. We have no third party, we have two frozen parties, complete bourgeois party, complete middle class parties, both of them, complete liberal parties. Only one of them is called conservative because they are older, but they call themselves new, but they are really old, so who should understand all this? So, but the others are newer. That's the Roosevelt thing there, and the Roosevelt thing means that they have been socially modified. So, yes, you should care for yourself, but what if you can't? Well, your family should help. But what if the family cannot? What if the market is blocked? What if the inventory doesn't go down and you don't have a job? What? Then the city must come. Then the state has to come. Then the federation has to come. That's the principle of subsidiarity. And the Roosevelt New Dealers got it from the Pope. They got it from Quadragesimo Anno, the second social encyclical letters, because in 1891 the Catholics suddenly, 50 years after Marx, discovered that something was wrong with capitalism. So then they started to social encyclical letters. So we have to see where the Pope stands with them. If he continues that tradition, if he sees it's not sufficient, or whatever. So we are building the context in which we want to understand the text which this Pope is producing by his symbols and so on, and what will become of this. Okay, so that, and further, how to do, they have threatened him already from Wall Street. They said to the Pope, well, if you want to deal with the poor and so on, that's fine, you know, but charity, that's fine. But if you go further, now what does that further mean? That is the question. That means if you become a Marxist or whatever, or if you want to change the system or whatever, then, you know, that will not work. So they have put him into limits already. So, and he had his own limits. We discussed that the last time. He was in Argentine, and he was under dictatorship. You know that we have these dictatorships everywhere. So capitalism needs cheaper and cheaper labor and cheaper resources in order to function. If that does not function, then we have the decline of the profit rate, which is the death knell of the capitalist system. That is why we have the schools of the Americas, where we train our terrorists who go into these villages of El Salvador, which is a fascist state supported by us. So we have them everywhere. That's their task to do, and we have in the Middle East too. Recently they fell, now in Egypt they are popping up again. So that is part of the structure. So and the Pope, what is now the Pope there, is criticized by his own friends, particularly by two priests, who said that he left him alone. So he said these liberation theologians should quiet down. They didn't quiet down, and the fascist junta then tortured them and so on. One of them celebrated a mass with him in Germany recently, and they reconciled with each other. The Pope studied in Frankfurt, where I studied in the Jesuit seminary in Frankfurt, St. Georgen. That's why I speak German very well too. And so the other one has died in the meantime. So, but he was now Romero. He was no Romero. If he had been Romero, they would have assassinated him. If he would have been the 6 Jesuits, you know, in El Salvador, they were all 6 assassins, and we want to look at these pictures for a moment, in order to see where the Pope came from and how he stood up with this there. We saw that Ratzinger played with the CIA and into their hands, and so did the Archbishop in Managua, who was an employee of the CIA and got paid for it and so on. So how far will that go, really? That is the thing. It is not enough to do, you know, to have nice gestures and wash feet or so. The question is a very big one. All the world religions are for the poor. You have a pillar of the 5 pillars where you have to take, in Islam, where you have to take care of the poor, and we have that always, and St. Francis had that, and so on. We had beggar orders and all that. But the question is, why must there be poor? Why did civil society, no matter how rich they got, always has a slum? a slum in Kalamazoo, a slum in Detroit, a slum in Chicago, a slum in Boston, all over slums, and there are the world slums, which are worse than the slums and so on. Why is that necessary at all? So then the people say, well, Jesus said, you know, you will have the poor always with you. But they don't see that with Jesus there is always an eschatological horizon there. That means give to the emperor what is the emperor's as long as he exists, and the guy will not exist very long because the Messiah is coming soon. So therefore you will have poor, yes, but not forever, namely only until the Messiah will come, and then there will be a classless type of a society. So, and what the Marxists have done, they have secularized the whole thing, right? And that makes them particularly painful enemies, and that is why liberals and fascists and Catholics hate socialism. Now, they can hate socialism, but they must give a good reason why they, and the rational people, why they hate socialism specifically and clearly and so on, because socialism is a philosophy like liberalism and like Catholicism and so on. So what we have, you know, when you look at this war situation which you saw there, we have a liberal society which splits up to such an extent between the rich and the poor and the wages and so on, which I read there, that then socialism goes up. So it's the right all the time which says this, Obama is a socialist. He doesn't have any slightest idea what socialism is. Obama is not a socialist. He is a Roosevelt liberal who prevented and prevents socialism. But if he cannot prevent it, then it will come. And then the ruling class mobilizes fascism against socialism. That is how it happens. And hopefully they will undo it, undo then socialism. And then you want to go back to socialism as you had, liberalism as you had it before. So these two wars had something to do with this, in particular the last one, where a liberal society, because of its injustices, produces a socialistic upheaval, and then you mobilize the fascist low middle class people, that's why they emphasize low middle class all the time, which then have to push those socialists down again, put them into concentration camps, or with Hitler they sent them even into the Soviet Union, to Stalingrad, which is now Volgograd and so on. That's where the attack was, the terror attack was last week. So so we have to see the connection within, and then where Catholicism fits into that. Well, Catholicism allied itself with fascism. That was the problem. And will they do that again? See, the Bush administration, the last one, would not have come in without the Catholic vote and without the evangelical vote, twice. In spite of the fact that he had killed 150 people in his prisons, death penalty, against the intervention of the Pope, and then had initiated 2 international wars, and they still voted him in the second time. But this is a misery. You know why I have 92 sessions here already? Because I took an oath. No, not an oath, I don't take oath, but I made a promise to myself in Germany, because after the war, when I came back, I was trained here to change the fascist society into a liberal one again. When I was a prisoner of war, they set me free and I was trained there. So at that time, I promised myself that the Catholics at that time, Frankfurt, all my friends, said, why didn't you tell us? Nobody told us. Nobody told us that we got to do this. Well, I said, from now on, you will be told. And I think we should continue that, to tell people where they are going, because it's not so mysterious as people think. It is quite clear where one is going, if one is willing, you know, to put the work into it and to study it. Okay, so let's start with this today, and you can take that home, and the next time I extend that a little bit, but we want to see that movie there. It is from El Salvador. Maybe some of you have seen it already. Now we can see it from a new perspective. So it's El Salvador, it's not Argentine, but they are all similar, these countries, because that is our colony, right? The British had India for a colony, the British in India, Hitler wanted to have it in the Ukraine, and in Africa he wanted to do the same thing what the British had done, what we have done. So Latin, Central America, and the Philippines are our colonies, and so the British and the Germans and so on had colonies in Africa. Capitalistic countries need colonies. And with the end of colonialism, it's not the end of colonialism. We put political people in their independence, but we kept the economic controls. In Iraq, there we have now two-thirds of the oil wells belong to us, 1/3 belongs to the Iraqians. And of course they're not happy with it, so the war goes on without us or whatever. Okay, so this story here shows us a little bit. They are Jesuits, like the Pope is a Jesuit. Romero has died already, has been assassinated. Also 5 nuns were assassinated. 2 of them were my students in Marinol, where I taught the nuns there. I taught the nuns so that they would know when they go to El Salvador, to know how to talk with socialists and so on. So then when they came home, we found out they didn't want to stay at home anymore, because when they told their parents at home what they did and what happened down there, nobody believed them, so they want to leave again. So I had to train them, first of all, to talk with the socialists, and then they came home to talk with their relatives, which were worse than socialists. So therefore, that was my task. I did this summer after summer. Okay, now can we have this? So that is a Jesuit there. I explain a little bit, because we want to do it a little faster, usually. So that's the same order where the Pope comes from. All 6 of them were, a Jesuit, like this one too. They have 6 years of theological studies, then they have 6 years of another study, they have another discipline. So they are medical doctors, or they are economists and so on. These 6 were economists, so they showed what we did in the colonial territory down there. Coffee. We got our rubber from Vietnam, right? We got our coffee from El Salvador, we got our oil from Iraq and so on. So you have to get cheap resources and cheap people, commodity, people and things, both are commodities. And they were specialists, so 6, that's why they were assassinated by the military, which we trained in Fort Benning, where our School of Assassins is. Here they are.